You're standing in your kitchen looking for your keys, and as you move from countertop to drawer to coat pocket, you hear yourself say, out loud in a perfectly conversational tone, "Okay, where did I put you, you little troublemaker?" Or maybe you're driving and a car cuts you off, and before you can even consciously process it, you've delivered a complete monologue to no one, full of editorial commentary, hand gestures, and at least one line you'd never say to a real human. Or maybe you walk into the grocery store with a clear plan in your head, but the moment you reach the produce section, you find yourself muttering, "Right, peppers, two of them, the red ones, not the green," like you're briefing a team that consists entirely of yourself. And then you catch a stranger looking at you, and for a second you panic. Did I just say that out loud? Was that the out loud voice or the in my head voice? You can never quite tell anymore. If you do this, and a lot of people do, far more than will ever admit it, you've probably wondered at some point if it's a sign that something is wrong with you. The cultural shorthand around talking to yourself is unfortunate. We treat it as the punchline of a joke, the marker of an eccentric character in a movie, or worse, the warning sign of mental illness. But what if I told you that the people who talk to themselves out loud are actually doing one of the most psychologically sophisticated things a brain can do? That this habit, far from being a weakness, is associated with better focus, faster problem solving, and stronger self-regulation? That you are not in fact going crazy, you are in many ways thinking better than people who don't? So let's get into it. Today we're talking about the real psychology of self-talk, and by the end of this video, I want you to walk away understanding not just why you do it, but why you should probably do it more. Let's start at the beginning, because the story of self-talk is genuinely older than we are. As children, we all talk to ourselves out loud, constantly. If you've ever watched a 4-year-old playing alone, you know exactly what I'm describing. They narrate their actions. Now the bunny is going up the hill, and the bunny is hungry, so the bunny needs a snack. They give themselves instructions. Don't drop it, hold it carefully. They argue with themselves about decisions that, to an adult, do not require argument. And we think it's adorable. We don't pathologize it. We understand intuitively that this is part of how children learn to think. What we don't always realize is that this behavior was meticulously studied by one of the most important developmental psychologists of the 20th century, the Russian researcher Lev Vygotsky. In the 1930s, Vygotsky was watching children narrate their own behavior, and he asked a simple but revolutionary question. Where does this self-talk go when they grow up? Because adults don't generally walk around narrating their lives at full volume. So what happens? Vygotsky proposed that the self-talk doesn't disappear at all. It goes inward. The external chatter children use to organize their thoughts becomes the internal monologue adults use to do the exact same thing. He called it private speech when it's spoken out loud, and inner speech when it's silent. Both, he argued, are essential tools for self-regulation, problem-solving, and learning. In other words, your inner monologue, that voice in your head that runs commentary on your life, is just self-talk that learned to whisper. And for most adults, most of the time, that internal version is enough. But sometimes, especially when the cognitive load gets heavy, or when something tricky needs working through, or when you're trying to motivate yourself, the inner voice gets louder. It crosses the threshold. It comes out of your mouth. And modern neuroscience is showing us that when this happens, something genuinely powerful is going on. Researchers have found that speaking to yourself out loud activates parts of the brain in ways that silent thinking simply doesn't. There's a phenomenon called the production effect. The consistent finding that when you say information out loud, you remember it better than when you read it silently. Multiple studies, including a notable 2010 paper published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, have demonstrated this across different ages and tasks. Saying something engages your motor system, your auditory system, and your memory system all at once. It's like turning on 3 lights in a room instead of 1. The thing you're working on becomes more vivid, more available, and harder to forget. This is why, when you can't find your keys, talking out loud actually helps you find them faster. It's not just a quirky habit. You're recruiting more cognitive resources to the search. You're literally giving your brain a better chance. There's another piece of research I find genuinely exciting, And it comes from a 2012 study by psychologists Gary Lupyan and Daniel Swingley. They had participants search for objects in a supermarket setting, sometimes silently, and sometimes while saying the name of the object out loud as they searched. The participants who talked to themselves found the items significantly faster, not by a small margin, by a meaningful, measurable, repeatable margin. The researchers concluded that hearing yourself name something activates a more focused mental representation of that thing. The act of speaking it sharpens the search. Your brain, hearing the word keys in your own voice, lights up the key-shaped part of your visual attention more strongly than if the word stayed silent. This is not eccentricity. This is cognitive optimization. It's the same reason a chess grandmaster mutters to themselves while studying a position, the same reason a surgeon talks through a procedure, the same reason the best problem solvers in any field tend to externalize their thinking. They are not less sane than the rest of us. They are using a tool that the rest of us have been quietly shamed out of. Let's go a little deeper, because there's an even more interesting layer here around emotional regulation. When you're stressed, anxious, or under pressure, talking to yourself out loud has been shown to reduce the intensity of those feelings. But here's the catch. It matters how you talk to yourself. Research by social psychologist Kross, who runs the Emotion and Self-Control Lab at the University of Michigan, has found that the way you address yourself in self-talk has a measurable effect on how you handle stress. Specifically, people who refer to themselves by their own name or use the word you instead of I tend to manage difficult emotions more effectively than people who use I. That sounds strange at first, but think about it. If your name is Alex and you're about to give a big presentation, the difference between thinking, I'm freaking out, and saying, Alex, you've got this, you've prepared for this, you're going to be fine, is enormous. The second version creates psychological distance from the emotion. It's the same effect as a wise friend talking to you instead of you spiraling alone. Kross calls this distanced self-talk, and his research suggests it can be one of the most effective free tools for managing anxiety, building courage, and getting through hard moments. People who do this naturally, who naturally narrate themselves in the second or third person, often have a built-in resilient strategy they don't even know they're using. Now I want to address the elephant in the room, because I know it's there. The cultural fear around talking to yourself comes from one specific place: the conflation of normal self-talk with the auditory hallucinations associated with certain psychiatric conditions. Let me be clear about something, because this matters. The kind of self-talk we've been discussing, narrating your actions, motivating yourself, working through problems out loud, is a completely normal cognitive behavior found across cultures, ages, and education levels. It is not the same as hearing voices that aren't yours. It is not the same as experiencing thoughts that feel like they come from outside of you. Talking to yourself, when you know you're talking to yourself and you're the one driving the conversation, is one of the most universal and well-documented thinking strategies in human psychology. The stigma around it is a cultural problem, not a psychological one. That said, there are moments when self-talk shifts from being a tool to being a sign that something deeper is going on. If your self-talk is consistently cruel, harsh, or self-attacking, that's worth paying attention to. Not because the act of speaking is a problem, but because the content of what you're saying to yourself is shaping your nervous system in real time. Researchers studying inner critics have found that the tone of habitual self-talk is one of the most powerful predictors of long-term mental health. The voice that lives in your head, the one you've been listening to for decades, has more influence on your well-being than almost any external voice ever will. And if that voice has become an enemy, the work isn't to silence it, the work is to change what it says. Which brings me to the final point I want to leave you with. Because this isn't just a video about why it's okay to talk to yourself. It's an invitation to think about what you say when you do. Because if self-talk is genuinely one of the most powerful tools the human mind has, and the research overwhelmingly suggests it is, then the way you use it matters. The encouraging voice you can summon when you're trying to find your keys is the same voice that can be there for you when you're trying to find your courage. It's the same instrument. It just gets pointed at different things. The most psychologically healthy people I've ever met are people who talk to themselves the way they would talk to someone they love. Not constantly, not loudly, not in public bathrooms in ways that would alarm strangers, but quietly, consistently, kindly. They coach themselves. They reassure themselves. They work things out with themselves. And in doing so, they become their own best company, their own most reliable ally. The person who, when everything outside is uncertain, is still saying steady, useful, encouraging things from inside. You already have this voice. You've had it your whole life. The only question is whether you've trained it to be a friend or trained it to be a critic. And the beautiful, almost philosophical truth of the matter is, that voice listens to itself. The self-talk you practice today shapes the self-talk you have tomorrow. You are, in a very real sense, in conversation with the version of you that hasn't arrived yet. So talk to yourself, out loud in your head, in the kitchen, in the car, in the produce section of the grocery store. Talk to yourself in the second person when things are hard. Talk to yourself with patience when you mess up. Talk to yourself the way you'd want a parent to talk to a child you loved. Because the brain you're building with that voice is the brain you're going to live in for the rest of your life. If this video made you feel a little less weird about something you've been doing forever, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you talk to yourself out loud? When does it happen? Tell me about it. Let's normalize the most underrated mental tool we have. And if this kind of psychology is what brings you back here, subscribe. We do this every single week, and I'd love to keep talking with you and, yes, occasionally to myself. See you in the next one.